Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's joining us from around the planet. Welcome to Creation Conversations, where this week we are doing the bow wow and getting down and dirty with the Doghouse. We're dealing with canines this week, but we've got our wonderful panel here of our international director John Mackay. We've got Craig Hawkins over in Tassie. We've got Dr. Glenn Wilson, the Dirt Doc, as he's best known for, and Dr. Diane Eager, who's all the way over in my neck of the woods currently. So how are we all doing, folks?
Yeah,
Well,
great.
down here, down under, I'm wet again. Sorry to interrupt you there, but it's still raining in Australia. Well, where I live anyway. So just to add something that you might be flavoured with climate change, ever since I was a kid, which is a long time ago now, I've noticed that if it's wet in southern to middle Queensland, it's dry in Tasmania and Victoria and South Australia. And that observation was made not by me first, but way back nearly 200 years ago. So climate does vary week by weeks about it. So that's my climate information at the moment. Diane?
Yeah, well, I like the fact that about 8 years ago, John, Tim Flannery, former Australian of the Year, said that climate change would mean that our dams won't fill anymore. And talking about Warragamba Dam, which is the major water supply for Sydney, and today it's going to spill again for about the fifth time in 8 years since he said that. So that's good. How good their predictions are.
God sits in the heavens and laughs.
Yes. Warragamba Dam is a seriously big dam. I've been there. Yes.
Great stuff. We're missing a team member this week. The eagle-eyed among you may notice. Our UK director, Joe Hubbard, is not here. What's he doing this week, guys?
Well, I believe he's away teaching and preaching somewhere.
Yeah, it's a homeschooling conference, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. What do you know about that, Sam?
Well, he's actually he's currently where I'm originally from, up in York. So if you're in that neck of the woods, head on down to Calvary Chapel for the homeschooling shenanigans going on. But yeah, so that's basically sort of us currently. We're going to be diving into our first sort of topic, first sort of line of our topic tonight about dogs. John, I believe you're first up, aren't you?
Yes, I'm going to just take a couple of minutes to introduce it because as the longest sitting member, I guess that's a good way to put it, I've had dogs ever since I was 4 or 5 years of age. In fact, my first memory is my dad and my uncle driving up to a place, picking up a dog, putting it in the open back. Now, yes, you heard me right. There were no seat belts. There were no seats. We sat in the back of a truck, a canvas-covered truck. The dog was thrown in with us, and we all set off to go back home. Now, halfway there, a big another truck or car must have bipped its horn because the dog up and out, and we never saw it again. Now, that was the shortest term dog that I ever owned, and ever since then, I've got all my dogs' name listed. I can tell you where they're buried and all of that, and the most wonderful things about them, or some of the not so wonderful things. But the one thing I do have to start the night is, how many of you people out there have fossil dogs? I found 2 fossil dogs in my history, and our subject tonight is canines. Now, dogs, this one here seems to be a fossil dingo found in Australia. My other dog was found in Guadeloupe, off the south coast of the USA or the north coast of South America. I was there doing research on the fossil Guadeloupe woman, and I dug up a fossil dog. It's interesting, the evidence that's there about, well, come on, do you know how I knew it was a dog? It looked like a dead dog. I got plenty of experience with dogs, living and dead, because they don't seem to live as long as we do. And if you live as long as me, you will bury quite a few dogs. Sad, but true. But they always seem to be dogs. But there's a funny side as well. So I got my secretary the other day to run through my book library, which includes some wonderful cartoons. Marmaduke, Foot Rot Flats, or some of you are old enough to remember the little runty kings who rode around on big dogs. Now, dogs are serious. Dogs are involved in guarding houses, and dogs are involved in interacting with us. I still remember standing at the door of my office here, and a friend of mine had come to visit me. And he was a dog man from way back. And all of a sudden, somebody appeared at the front gate, and the dog, the hackles on its back, the hair behind their neck, it just rose, and the dog went grrr. And my friend who was visiting me said, "I'll vote with the dog." In other words, dogs are pretty good at working out what you are like physically, mentally, even morally. Dogs have a good register of what people are like. So tonight, as we cover everywhere from fossil dogs to living dogs to dogs that do funny things, because Craig's got his monster available as a bit of evidence tonight. But our starting point, I guess we're going to start in the southern half of the USA. So, Dr. Glenn, would you like to come on up and share some of the things that you've learned over the years being the dirt doc of creation research?
All right. Well, I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. Just a second. And we're going to start, should be coming up now. We're going to just start at the beginning in Genesis. And I'm just going to remind people of the kind of the basis of what a lot of what we're going to talk about today. Out of Genesis 1, it says, "Then God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees on the earth bearing fruit after their kind with seed in them. The earth brought forth vegetations, plants yielding seed after their kind, and trees bearing fruit after their kind." And you get the point. It goes on and on. They're talking about the sea monsters and every living creature that moves, with which the water swarmed after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle and creeping things and beasts of the earth after their kind, after their kind, after their kind. 10 times in Genesis 1, he defines biological life as all were after their kind. And even when he gave the commands to Noah about the ark, 5 times he tells them, bring 2 of every kind of all birds after their kind, and of the animals after their kind. So God takes this very serious about, he set certain limits within the biological diversity of animals of all types and plants, or after their kind. Question is, what is a kind? We've talked about this before. We as humans, we're going to try to classify these, and this system of phyletic classification was developed by a Christian, Carl Linné, or Carl von Linné, who was a botanist, and he's considered the father of modern taxonomy. And he built the system based upon that biblical concept of all creatures can be distinguished by their kind. So he built a system of distinguishing these in different categories down to the genus. And genus was the Latin for kind. He took it straight out of the Bible, and species was a special type within that kind. In other words, that kind could have a variety, could have diversity within it. But the whole taxonomic classification system is based upon the biblical principle that all life forms can be distinguished. We can see certain characteristics and fit them into a kind. And that was 100 years before Charles Darwin. But since Darwin, they've done a couple of things. They've added in 2 new classes, the phylum and the family just above genus. But they've used this classification system to try to show it's based on linkages, that they are wanting to show how life forms evolved, when in fact the whole premise of the phyletic system is no, they are by distinct kinds within. So the question is really, what is a kind? We're going to be talking about the canines. And all of these you see, the wolf, the coyote, fox, domestic dogs are all in the same family, in the same genus, Canis. And so the question is, from a biblical standpoint, what is a kind? This is something that we debate a good bit about among creationists. It's baramens. Baramens, it's bar is created and the men is kind. That's from the Hebrew. And so where do you make this distinction? Because now we're going to talk a lot about how we have so many different types of domestic dogs, but they are all of one kind. All of these are different in different anatomic characteristics, but they can all breed. And I say that because I used to have a Labrador retriever when I was in graduate school that a person we got it from said, well, our lab gave birth, but we're not sure if it's half German Shepherd or half Coyote because they both got in the fence and bred with the dog. Well, I love that dog. That was my favorite dog of all times. We hiked, we canoed. The dog loved canoeing, whitewater, but she'd get excited sometimes and jump out the canoe, which would make it a little tipsy. But she had all these characteristics that I hadn't seen in a domestic dog. Like anytime she found a dead animal, that's what she was going to rub in. She wanted that scent on her. And I took her to work with me one day. I was working as a forest hydrologist, and I was way out in the woods at my research site doing night storm monitoring. And a pack of coyotes came through, and she left me and was gone. She decided to become a coyote. And every day for about 3 weeks, I would go out there and try to call her. And I finally just gave up. And one day I was out there doing work, and here she comes running up. She was ready to be a dog again, a domestic dog. Usually coyotes will kill a domestic dog if they, like that. But nope, she just went and ran with them. And so we have all these distinction of breeds, but all of these are actually not just the same genus, they're the same species, Canis familiaris. And so we breed these to get certain distinctions, but it's not always a distinction based upon their anatomy. Oftentimes it's based upon what their personality is, what they are driven by. I've had 2 labs in my life, and both of them were just obsessed with retrieving. That's just what they did. And if they didn't have something in their mouth and you throwing constantly till your arm gave out, I mean, they weren't happy. That was just their life. But that breeding sometimes can lead to a lot of problems because labs were known for having hip problems. And my last lab had such hip problems. He got to the point couldn't walk. But that lab was interesting because the really great dog, except during the summertime, we'd have to pin her up because she would eat our corn before right when it was getting ripe and ready to pick, she'd go through our cornfield worse than the raccoons eating it. And at one point, we were going to accuse our neighbors' kids of stealing all of our strawberries. But then we found out, no, our dog was eating our strawberries. He would also eat our muscadines, which are like grapes. But they're all the same. Even this Great Dane and that little Chihuahua, they are all in the same species. So I think Diane's going to talk a lot more about some of this. I'm going to stop sharing, and Sam, we can go back to you. I can just attest to, like John, I'm 67. I've had a lot of dogs, and the sad part is burying them. You get so attached to them. I was telling the others, my dad was a tough country man. The only time I ever saw him cry is when our hunting dog, his favorite one, died, and he broke down. And I got to tell you, I get that same way about our dogs. We get a bond with them.
Well, I'll add one thing here before we hand over to Diane. I was interested in your comment about genus and kind and the connection there, because one of the things that came out of my studies at university was the origin of the scientific systems, including Linnaeus or Carl von Linné. And it's not just you having a guess that genus equals kind. Linnaeus and all of the academics in the 1600s, etc., when they went to university, they read their Bible in Latin. Now, you can grab a Latin Bible, you can grab a Greek Bible, a Septuagint, you can look it up, and you'll find that Latin and Greek are brother-sister languages, so they have the same word in Genesis chapter 1, verse 11, and the word is not kind, the word is not the Hebrew min, it's the Latin/Greek genus.
Yes.
So Carl von Linz simply took it straight out of the Bible. So this is not a guess, right? This is actually what they did. The scientific classification system arose out of the biblical concept that these genus were separate. They have a separate origin. And I say that because one of the things we did in classification theory was discuss all the problems the Greeks and the Romans had trying to identify something or define it consistently. So do you label a prawn as group A because it's got blue blood? But does that apply to royalty? How do you decide which of these groups, what's most important, the number of legs, the number of eyes? And the Greeks and the Romans could never decide because they had an evolutionary mindset. They had gods who were never consistent. And yet Linnaeus, as a Christian man, as a Bible-believing framework, God said he created them separately, genus, after its own kind, and he was the guarantee. Hence, don't be surprised, the classification system works, not because Linnaeus was a genius, but because God had invented the genus, right? And it actually was meant to be a separately identifiable classification, even if we struggle as to which group goes into where, right? So it's the concept that's important, and it's a Christian concept. So thanks for a reminder about that, Glenn. Diane, over to you.
Yes, we've written quite a lot about dogs in our fact file, which is our archive of newsletter items, and in our Ask John Mackay site, our question and answer site. We've had a few questions about dogs. So I've just got a few examples there, but do have a look on both of those sites and you'll see some quite interesting things that we've written over the years that have been discovered about dogs. And of course, with the genome revolution over the last couple of decades, the genetics of dogs has been investigated. And the interesting thing is that dogs, because of all of that variation that you've got, as you saw with Glenn's presentation there, dogs have been used by the evolutionists as an example of evolution in action. But if we look at that a little bit closer, we can see that it's not actually any such thing. So if we can go to my slides now, thank you. Yes, creation in the doghouse. This was a question that was sent into the Ask site, to the question and answer site. Dogs have undergone many changes since people have been breeding them. Surely this is evolution. Well, the quick answer to that is yes, the changes are real. However, this is not evolution, and that's something that's a sort of continual theme with us at Creation Research. There's lots of change in the scriptures and lots of change in the world out there that we can observe, but none of that is evolution. Change is very real. The world has changed, but it hasn't evolved. So let's have a look at dogs. Now, this was a story that we wrote about back in 2007, and the actual heading of the article that we saw on the University of Manchester News was that St. Bernard's study casts doubt on creationism. The author of this article was trying to use changes that had been observed in St. Bernard's, very large dog, over 120 years since the breed was first defined. There have been a few changes, and you could see that in this collection of skulls that a scientist had studied. And what they found is that compared with the original breed, the modern dogs had a few features. They had broader skulls, they had more pronounced ridges over their eyes, and a steeper angle between the nose and the forehead. Now, you saw the variation in Glenn's presentation there, huge variation that you can get in the size and shapes, but within the same structure, as it were. So this is certainly a change, but it's hardly evolution, because the St. Bernards are still the same dog. And this was a comment that was made by one of the scientists from the University of Manchester. These changes are exactly those features described as desirable in the breed standard. Now, notice that. How did those changes come about? They are real. Right? And he went on to say they are clearly not due to other factors such as general growth, and they provide the animal with no physical advantage. That's true. So we can be confident they have evolved. But notice what he says, purely through selective considerations of breeders. So what's happening here? It is selection. Now, we've all been trained in the general world these days to think of selection as being part of evolution. But selection is real, but it's not evolution. And this was a further comment in that same article. Creationism is the belief that all living organisms were created according to Genesis in 6 days by intelligent design, and rejects the scientific theories of natural selection and evolution. Well, we do reject the theory of evolution, but we do not reject natural selection. That is a real process. But notice the way they try to conflate those two things. Then they went on to say that this research once again demonstrates how selection, whether natural or in this case artificially influenced by man, is a fundamental driving force behind the evolution of life on the planet. So by going from a small change or a few small changes about eye ridges and the angle of the dog's nose, they have suddenly decided they have evidence for the evolution of life on the planet. Now, to me, that's rather a large quantum leap. However, the change is real and the selection is real, and that's an important point when we look at dogs these days. Dogs have certainly changed due to selection, but think about what selection means as just a plain English word, right? To select things means that you just choose between already existing options. The dogs themselves remain the same species. So there's no evolution. They're still the same species and certainly the same kind. But let's go back to the selection. Is it necessarily good for the dogs? Because evolution is supposed to be a process where things are improving. They're getting bigger, better, more complex, or improving. But what has selection done for dogs? Well, sometimes not a lot of good. Here's an example of some of the genetic studies that have been done on distinctive dog breeds over the last few years. A study of 19 short-legged breeds. Now, by that we include dachshunds, corgis, Pekingese, basset hounds. And this study found that they had an extra gene for a growth factor called fibroblast growth factor 4. Now, you don't need to know that. Now, you would think, oh, well, having an extra gene, surely that's evolution. Surely that's better for it. But having an extra growth factor just means that you get the wrong areas of tissue stimulated at the wrong times. And even though this sounds like it should make the dog bigger, in fact, it results in the deformity of the bones. And it results in something called chondrodysplasia. Now, if you think that sounds like a disease, you are right. If it occurred in any other animal, and it does, it is called a disease. But in these dogs, it's actually part of the breed standard. Now, they didn't realize when they identified the breeds or set out the breed standard that it has to have certain features, that it was because of this particular gene, but they've found it in all of those breeds that have these distinctive short legs as part of their breed standard. That's the standard that's defined by the authorities who say whether this dog is a true pedigree dog or whether it's just a mutt or a mungle or a bitzer or whatever you like to call a mixed breed dog, right? Now, this has become such a problem, not just in legs, but in all sorts of other aspects of dogs, that it has come to the notice of the secular media. And back in 2008, in fact, the BBC made a documentary about what terrible mutations have done to these very, very distinctive, highly bred, pedigreed dogs. And this was a comment that was made by a vet who worked for the RSPCA, that's a Society for the Protection of Animals. And he said, when I watch Crufts, that's a highly respected dog show in the UK, but it's the same all over the world. There are these dog shows where people bring their highly bred dogs. And this vet made the comment, what I see is a parade of mutants. It's some freakish, garish beauty pageant that has nothing, frankly, to do with health and welfare. We have become completely and utterly desensitized to the fact that breeding these deformed, disabled, disease-prone animals is either shocking or abnormal. And that is a good point, that a disease can be built into the breed standard. In other words, this dog does not fit the particular breed unless it has a disease. Now, that is, to me, with my medical background, that's totally counterintuitive, that you should want something to have a disease built into it. But also, I think vets would agree with that as well. And people who really, truly love dogs would say that as well. Now, since then, there has been a bit of a revolution in trying to eliminate some of these very serious diseases in the very, very highly inbred dogs, but they are still there and still in the breed standards. So we do have lots of distinctive changes in structure and in functions, and as Glenn said, in temperament and personality. That's just as much a feature of distinctive dog breeds as their size and shape and colouring and other such things. But all of these distinctive breeds all have their drawback, these very highly bred ones. So with the Dachshunds, of course, you have the problem with the short legs, which means that the whole body is very low slung, so they have lots of problems with their spine as well as with their joints. The one in the middle there is a pug dog, which have a flattened face. Bulldogs have the same thing as well. Now, that means that they can't breathe properly, and so that decreases their exercise tolerance and makes them prone to respiratory infections and infections in the folds of the skin as well. And even big, tough-looking dogs like the boxer, they are prone to heart disease and to joint problems. And the Dalmatian at the bottom there has an interesting problem. They have a problem with uric acid. Now, people, or some people, have a problem with uric acid, and it gives you a terrible disease called gout. And Dalmatian dogs have that same problem, and they can get gout, which is a terrible disease, causes dreadful arthritis, and it also causes kidney stones and bladder stones. So do have a look in our fact file and on our Ask site, and you will find all sorts of interesting things about dogs, including some other genetic studies. There's no point in repeating them over and over again. The principle is the same. When we've looked for distinctive features of all of these dog breeds, quite often we find mutations and disease-causing processes. We certainly do not find evolution. So if you can come back to us now, I think you've had a bit of experience with Glenn, with dogs that have flat faces. You were telling me an interesting story.
Well, just that our universities here in America, they all have their mascots, and the most common one is the bulldog, I think, and certain university, I should not mention, has their mascot, and they've always wanted it to be from the same line, but they have problems from what I hear of their mascots don't last very long because they keep this inbreeding, and it's just getting less and less healthy. Their dogs have major health issues because of the mutations.
Glenn, I'll add to that, because one of the things I'd encourage people when they come to Australia, hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, we need your tourist dollars, please come. But you won't find too many St. Bernards. The reason is very simple, and I'm a victim of the same problem. Some of you already know that I've talked a bit about my thyroid. My thyroid died ages ago, but every now and then, John Mackay gets really hot and he has to eat like a horse just to keep going. And I eventually figured out my thyroid must be switching on again. And when I complained to the specialist, they said, not possible. Your thyroid is dead. I said, well, I don't care what you guys say. It is doing something that only thyroids do. And if you come to Australia and you see everybody else in a jacket except me, it means my thyroid is doing something. Now, as a result of that, of course, I managed to score a wee victory against the medical specialist, because insisting on being tested, they actually caved in and said, oh, wow, there's something going on. You have something hypothyroidea. I said, what's that mean? It means something activates your thyroid, even though it's supposed to be dead every now and then. I said, I told you. And it heats me up. Now, the same situation, but in perpetuity, exists for the St. Bernard. One of the dogs we studied in genetics at Queensland University was the St. Bernard. And if you're wondering why it's so good at providing whiskey barrels to lost skiers, digging them up in the snow, it's because it almost melts the snow with its feet. There's so much energy going through that dog because of its thyroid function that it can lose energy into the snow. But it means it's impossible to keep them without being cruel here in Australia. It's too warm, it's too hot. And if you want to kill off a 150-pound dog, that's a beautiful beast, bring it to Australia. But it means that what you are selecting for in the snow is actually limiting the dog. It's not evolving. The natural selection is reducing its range. And Diane, you'd agree that that's what natural selection basically does all the time?
Yes. Selection just eliminates some things and keeps other things. So, in fact, it's reducing the genome. Yes.
Well, the term selection is clearly pointing at selecting something it's already got.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
It goes back to after their time.
Yes, indeed.
What's up?
Did you bring your monster in this morning to show everybody?
I brought my mutant. Yes, I'll just give me a second, and I'll get him up.
Okay, because Craig's also going to address the issue of our right to breed animals, whether they be mutants like that. What sort of a dog is that, Craig?
So this is a fox terrier and chihuahua cross, part of the terrier group. And the terriers are actually really interesting because there's about 15 odd sort of breeds within the terrier group, including the pit bull terriers, Staffordshire terriers, Welsh terriers, Scottish terriers, Irish terriers. So originally bred in the UK, obviously. And the foxy terrier, like this one, is either short-haired or it can be wiry-haired. This is obviously a wiry-haired one. And the terriers are a group of dogs that were bred to basically hunt out rats and to be hunting dogs. So they've got a pretty tenacious, can be quite vicious sort of temperament. Anyone that knows pit bull terriers will know what I'm talking about there. They can be very scary dogs, and up until the early 1900s, people would breed them to fight until it was outlawed. But they can be pretty tenacious. And this little fellow, I mean, he's not a big dog. You can sort of see he's one of these short-legged mutants. But he will go at, if we're walking him down the street, he will go at dogs 5 times bigger than him. So he's got that tenacious sort of attitude still there, but in more recent times, they've been bred to be, gentler and beautiful. He loves a pat. He loves a cuddle. He's a beautiful little dog. He's been a great family pet. His name's Brownie, and he's a lovely, loyal, gentle dog. He's been great with the kids. So he's been selected for his nature out of that terrier group. He's been selected, I guess, for his colour and those things as well. His legs are part of what Diane was talking about. But yeah, an example of really a mutant. And Diane's comment about the low slung dogs having back problems. Every now and again, he's had some problems walking, just rarely, but occasionally he's had some of those spinal issues come and go. So even this little fella has got some of that. Craig,
can I ask you a question? You said this was a cross between two dogs. What was it again?
A Chihuahua and a Fox Terrier.
Yeah, wow. That Chihuahua is the one the ladies put in their purse on the aeroplanes. The tiny little
yeah.
dog.
Yeah, little dog, yeah.
It's interesting. I've never seen a cross between a Great Dane and a Chihuahua.
Mm-hmm.
It's geographically impossible.
Yes.
So there's all sorts of limitations to even breeding these things. And you're actually a seahorse breeder. So do you want to spend a couple of minutes on our right to breed these animals and some of the things that you guys experiment with down there?
Yeah, okay. Well, I have got some slides, just a couple of slides. I'll put the little fella down. If you've got those there, Sam, that we can get up. So we breed seahorses. We have tried to breed certain characteristics in, but again, we're breeding things that are already in the creatures. We're trying to select for things that we already see and that we think would be more desirable. So we've tried to breed yellow into the potbelly seahorse, which is the one on the right of this picture. It's often a speckly species, and you can see even in that picture there's some black ones there and some lighter silver ones, but the yellow ones are quite stunning. And so we're a couple of generations down in attempting to breed yellow ones. The logistics are difficult in our particular setup, but we've had a bit of a go at it and had some success as well, because we're breeding them for basically the pet trade. People want ones that look good. So that's what we're doing. We haven't noticed any genetic problems in them, I might add, but they are, sort of basically a beautiful looking creature that we're trying to do. The one on the left is a Western Australian one and quite possibly a wild one. I'm not 100% sure with that one, but probably a wild one that's naturally yellow like that. So some of the species have the natural colours in them anyway. And another feature that we breed, if I click on that, it should allow me to go down, is the cirri. So in some seahorses, not all, but in the potbelly seahorse, for example, they have these extensions on the body, but not 100% of them have it, and they seem to be almost able to grow them and lose them at will. But we've tried to breed that into some of the lines that we do as well, just as an attractive ornament that they have on them. Yeah, but some people don't like the fact that we're breeding fish. In fact, the fish breeding industry is quite huge around the world. You may as well come back to us now, Sam. But the fish industry around the world is quite huge, and there's all sorts of fish being bred out there, tropical fish and the like. And some people don't like that fact that humans are taking control over animals like this, and I guess it's the same with dogs or any domesticated creature. Whereas I've got no problem with it as such, if it's done properly, because we have a different worldview. We have a worldview that God said, go forth and take stewardship of the earth, and this can be part of that, where we can love and care for these animals and show love and care for them, and enjoy the beauty of creation. So I guess that's really what we're doing, and providing them to people for those purposes.
Thanks, Craig. Before we have question time, Sam, do you want to come back full screen?
As in putting you full screen, John.
And are you full screen, mate? And you?
Me?
Thank
Okay.
you. Because I believe you have some portable evidence as well with fur on.
Looking good, Sam.
Yes.
Where is it, Sam? Come on, tell us what's this mutant.
Well, this evidence is right next to me. So this is... hang on. This is my...
That's an unusual dog.
I know, right? This is my Mikaneko, or a calico cat. So Mikaneko is Japanese for triple fur cat. There's a calico. She's absolutely gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why you're squirming. You love me on camera, you tart. Come on. Anyway, right.
Now, does he love dogs, Sam?
It's a she, and I've no idea.
Well, our cats love dogs, and our daughter brought her dog over yesterday, Siberian, and our cat just ran up there and they rubbed noses because they love each other.
Well, that's great. Give me the screen for a few seconds, Sam, before we have our Q&A and thank yous. Now, the reason I asked Sam to show his cat was that I'm a real fan of Garfield. Now, Garfield is a cat that keeps taking the mickey out of a dog. And every now and again, the dog wins and we all go, yay! Now, I don't know about you, but I've almost noticed a perpetual dislike, disinterest, disingenuous friendship between cats and dogs. But basically, a lot's got to do with how you train them. So we had one cat that would love our dogs except for one moment of the day. The dogs would walk all the way around the house and the cat would get up and sit on the top of the fence just above the eye level of the dogs. And as soon as the dogs walked through the gate, the cat would rise up on all four paws with all sets of claws and descend from outer space into the middle of the back of the dog where he go, yay, 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 yay. And you could actually see that dog, that cat grinning. Now, apart from that, they really did enjoy each other. So animals do have a sense of humor, and they live in a world which, as Craig reminded us, we have been given authority over the planet. We have been given dominion over the animals. And that, by the way, is your right in print for actually keeping dogs and cats. And you're also responsible to the owner, and it's not you. The ultimate owner is God, whether it's seahorses, whether it's tabby cats, whether it's lovely turtle, the turtleback sort covered cats or dogs. It is God's property, and we must deal with it accordingly. Okay, Sam, thank yous and question time.
Yeah, just on that, actually, I see multiple bits of footage online on social media of cats playing around with dogs and being best friends and stuff like that. But also, you are very well right. Cats do genuinely have a sense of humor, as do dogs. Case in point is my other cat you may have seen on other live streams, black and white cat called Leo. That's Nico. She is constantly just playing pranks on him all the time, just jumping out of nowhere, and he really doesn't like it. He's very solitary and very miserable a lot of the time. But anyway, right, let's deal with some thank yous and questions. First up on the thank yous list is, of course, Doki Doki Bible Club, going with what 99 US cents Ruth, a smiling face with sunglasses. Thank you so much. I'll give you one of these. Yeah, thank you. And we've got Doki again coming in with 149 US buckaroos, a yellow dog. You'll have to make do with that calico down there from me, unfortunately. But we'll come on to a question. This is an interesting one. We touched on this earlier. Fiorella Clerk, apologies if I butchered your name. Is there some dogs more violent than a lot of others?
Glenn?
There certainly are dogs that are known for being more aggressive. And Some of them are, bred for that, for a purpose as guard dogs. But there, you can look at the breeds, which are the number one breeds for biting people, and that's a good place to start. And then you've got some that are just bred for being so gentle and loving. Craig, you are just spot on about the terrier. The dog that I mentioned that my dad broke down crying when it passed was a terrier, and it was a rat dog, a squirrel dog, because we were squirrel hunting. We didn't have deer in the woods at that time. And that dog was just ferocious. And in fact, we knew it from the time it was a puppy. We named it Tuffy because it would just whip every dog it could get in a fight with, along with the squirrels. They have certain characteristics. And so certainly one of those characteristics can be that some dogs are more violent, as in more aggressive, than others.
Yeah.
And if you're wondering what the history of that is, we need to remind you of a thing that we are mentioning over and over again. The real history of the world is good to bad to worse. So when God created the world, as Glenn rightly read from Genesis chapter 1, it was very good, and God created things separate kinds, and they were very good. So there was no puppy dogs chasing pussycats around to rip their eyeballs out on the edge of the Garden of Eden. Everything got along. And you say, well, how do you get from there to where we have pit bulls that are notorious, a little bit of aggro, and they'll tear you to pieces even? Think carefully. When you have a look at Noah's Ark, all the animals were there for the whole year together. No cat fights, no dog fights. You would have run out of creatures. So when God sent the animals to the ark, not even Mrs. Noah said, no pit bulls, right? Not even Mrs. Noah said, no snakes. There's not the slightest evidence that any of the animals at that stage had begun to kill one another, even though there was violence in the land, right? Violence covered everything. But the aggro that led to them killing each other is not mentioned as being active in history until the book of Job, when animals are starting to kill each other for food. Notice, good, all vegetarian, then bad, sin comes in, then judgment, Noah's flood, all the animals still can get along for a year in a confined place, Noah's Ark. And then after that, we have a new world where there's summer and winter. Now, I don't know if you've ever tried to live out in the bush. I used to run survival clubs, right? Teach kids how to live when you had nothing but a bit of rock and a bit of flint and things like that. And in reality, you need to recognize which berries you eat. Don't eat red, you're dead usually. All those sort of little rules you can have. But think carefully. When you're a dog and all of a sudden people start hunting you, what do? Well, in reality, if you've got sharp teeth, you no longer use them for picking grapes. You actually discover they have several other functions that may save your neck. And one of the saddest parts of what we call natural selection has been the elimination of creatures that do not make those choices. We've watched the animals themselves become more and more aggressive, largely due to our influence. So if you're wondering why pit bulls have gotten so savage, we've selected them for that. But then in natural cases, the selection has been part of survival of the fittest, which is very real. The fittest is occurring because the summer and winter has produced a degenerate environment. We've gone hunting. That's produced degenerate behavior. And so finally you end up with violence amongst the animals. That's your observation too, isn't it, Glenn?
Well, we have 2 cats, and they were raised, we got them when they were just little kittens from a family who had chickens. And our cats, they guard the chickens. They hang out with the chickens, even the little chicks. And yet they will go hunt birds, but they know not to do that with the chicks. They guard them. They follow them. It's the strangest thing, but that's a good picture of what the Garden of Eden was like.
Yeah.
And
The
what
thing
it
is,
would be like in a new heaven and a new earth.
Yeah, we've got some friends that are dog breeders, and they would tell you how if you're not careful when you're breeding dogs, you can breed in the wrong temperaments, and once you've got a bad line, it would just keep breeding that bad temperament for whatever genetic or hormonal sort of imbalance that you're breeding into the particular breed.
Yeah. And just on that,
And sorry, I want to apologise to Douglas Boffey too. I noticed he picked me out for calling the Republic of Ireland part of the UK. I'm geographically ignorant. I'm sorry, but I meant that region. Okay, you're pretty close. on an Australian's geographical sort of idea of distance, that's pretty close.
Well, you're doing good for somebody that's hanging upside down.
Yeah, we have to turn our cameras upside down to make us look right.
Just sort of on the question as well. Obviously, in the news in the UK, there's been the whole thing about the XL bully, which has been basically selected to essentially be killed off. You have to apply for a special license to keep your XL bully. Otherwise, you had to have it euthanized by the end of January this year. There's a whole bunch of stuff because there was a rise in attacks by XL bullies being bred for sort of like gang-related activities and stuff. It's a horrible situation because, to be honest, a lot of XL bullies are very sweet and very loving, but it's just sort of those few that sort of spoil it for everyone. And so the government had to sort of take action. But also as well, one sort of thing that we've sort of ignored slightly is the German Shepherd, who's classically involved in police work. If you see any footage of police dogs in action, typically it's a German Shepherd, and when they bite hard and they do not let go. But they are some of the most sweetest dogs. If you're not on the other end of those chompers and you're not running for your life from the popo or the fuzz or whatever you want to call them, they are so sweet and loving, and they're so friendly, and they adore you so much. But it entirely depends on what they're trained to do in a lot of breeds. But a lot of breeds do have those sort of genetic dispositions to lean more in towards the violent and aggressive side, as we've sort of seen with sort of various different things like pit bulls and XL bullies and things like that. That's just sort of my 2 cents on that one. We've got also another donation coming from Neil Grindley for 10 British buckaroos. Thank you, Neil. God bless you. Do you want to do one more question before you jump into the next section?
Yeah, one more question, then we should be right.
All right, then. Here we go. This is one for Diane. This comes in from Show You Are. Ari, an extra gene. This is an increase in quantity, not an increase in quality of the genes, I presume, meaning it is a copy of an already existing gene.
Yes, that's right. What's happened is that the gene has been duplicated as a defect in the process of copying it, as if the photocopier, as it were, got stuck, spat out another one. But that is not an improvement. All it means is that is a gene for a growth factor, which is a signaling factor telling tissues when to grow and where to grow. And so you end up with the wrong amount of signaling, and that means that the tissues grow abnormally. So it's not an advantage. It is actually a disease.
Great stuff. Well, we'll move on to our next section now. I believe that's you, John.
That's me, that's for sure. Dog lover from way back. And when I bring up the slides, we are going to be talking about my old friend Richard Dawkins, because he's one of these who says, if you make little changes in dogs, give them shorter legs, then given long enough, you can see why we've evolved. Now, when we have a think about that, this issue is not just a cute chat about how to breed dogs with short legs that Craig Hawkins can keep upside down in Tasmania, or the police dogs that Sam's just been talking about, or the German Shepherds, which have way long noses with lots of smell capacity so they can detect drugs and you name it. It's not only that, it's also about the fact that God created them as a separate kind, and Richard Dawkins and the other evolutionists, David Attenborough, etc., loves to attack God at any stage. So when they talk about dogs, their real aim is to dismiss the God of creation. When they talk about dogs and natural selection, their real aim is to undermine not just biblical truth, but truth in general about what we see with dogs. What they say is an exaggeration based on no long-term experience at all. All our long-term experiences show that dogs produce dogs. So, Sam, if you will actually put me back up. Here we go. Now, have you got my screen up there, Sam, somehow? There
You're
we are.
ready to go.
All right. Here's the quote. Now, I can freely quote about Richard Dawkins because he gives me quite a lot of space in this book, The Greatest Show on Earth. Selection in the form of artificial selection by human breeders can turn a pie dog into a Pekingese. Now, we've talked about cabbages and cauliflowers before, and Diane and I have done a wonderful lot of research on that, along with Joseph as well, who we're missing tonight, but we'll catch him up next week. So when you have a look at the... why am I not moving, Sam?
Are you on your PowerPoint instead of Restream?
Let me just check.
Just click on it. Click on it.
Okay. No.
You need to go into your PowerPoint.
Yes.
Your full screen
so,
presentation.
Yeah, I am full screen on the screen. What am I doing wrong?
Okay, go down. Can you see your start bar at the bottom?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and then hover over PowerPoint, and then click on your full screen presentation.
Okay. That one there. There we are. That's it. All right. So there is the pie dogs as illustrated by Dawkins or others. Particularly the bottom one, you'll see its little curved tail. Now, the reason I show you this is that the whole argument is if you can change these into Pekingese, you know, that funny little flat-nosed dog the Chinese particularly love, then you can evolve man given long enough. Now, why am I showing you a map of the world with India on it? Because pie dogs are historically associated with India. So I'm going to show you some interesting facts about Indian dogs because I've been there. Here I'm running a school meeting. Yes, this school was paid for by a Christian businessman who lived in India. The kids have no uniforms they own. He provides them with all. There are really generous Christians around the place. He provides all the equipment, the building. So praise the Lord. The Indians can do this as well as you can. Oh, there he is there. There's me a few years ago on the left-hand side. Had a bit more hair then. Interesting. You see, there's the view from outside the school. Isn't that atrocious? The kids live in this district and their homes are pretty awful. They have nothing to eat much, no supplies. So he provides them all. And in the rubbish outside the school, you see these dogs. Okay, these dogs are everywhere. At night, you hear them being killed by the tigers and that just in the next door forest. They provide food for lots of things, people included. Okay, and they scavenge all day. Notice the tail? You see, here we are now in Australia. We're on the place that used to be called Fraser Island. Do you see the dingoes? Yes, that's our so-called native dog. Turns out it's only been here for some 4,000 years based on DNA studies. It can be semi-domesticated. Why do I say that? Well, it lives on the edges of Aboriginal camps. It will meander around the edges of cattle stations. It will actually even breed with what we call domestic dogs. And when we actually look at where the dogs have traveled, now what you're looking at here is a portion of Dr. John Osgood's lecture recently on the origin of the Australian Aborigines. But one of the things that's been noticed is wherever the people went from the middle of the world over in the Middle East all the way around, they took their dogs with them. And you can actually track their progress by dogs or by people. And when you look at the migration rates across to Australia and the migration routes, you will find it matches dog distribution and dog bones as well. And the types are interesting. You see, here we are down in Victoria in a place called Bunjil's Cave. Now, this group of Aboriginals, Bunjil was the chief creator of everything. Bunjil created basically the universe. Bunjil created the birds and everything. But do you see what's in the pictures? Do you see the dogs? Okay. Now, according to the experts, these are dingoes, and dingoes haven't been here for more than 4,000 years. So the fact is that cave set of drawings was not made by people who are 65,000 years here. That set of cave drawings was made when there were dingoes present that they could see. So it definitely seems that the dingoes and the Aboriginals have arrived along the same routes. There's an interesting portion in the Bible which may very well be about dingoes. It says, his watchmen are blind, writes the book of Isaiah. They are all ignorant. They are all dumb dogs. They cannot bark. Now, did you realize there's a lot of information in the Bible about dogs? There's only 2 known dogs that don't bark at the moment on the planet. One's the Basenji in Africa, and the other is the dingo in Australia. And you will notice the curved over tail, particularly on the Basenji. You've already seen it on the dingo who's lying down there. It's interesting. There's recently come out this paper back in 2017 on tracing dogs and their distribution and their use in hunting. Okay, there's the dog they're talking about, courtesy of the owner. Look at the tails. Modern Canaan dogs. Canaan, yes. You will find that when Abraham first went into Canaan, there were dogs. When the shepherds were going down to actually check out the new baby in Bethlehem, there were dogs. The shepherds used dogs, Canaan dogs. Look at their tails. In fact, it turns out that this attribute that many of the dingoes possess has given rise to one of our great cattle dogs, the blue cattle dog, or the red heel is sometimes called, and it's definitely a European/dingo cross. And it's marvelous for both endurance. It's got a double coat, so it can stay outside all year long if it likes, and it is brilliant for rounding up things. Dogs, cattle, selection, choosing. Oh, there's a Aboriginal done up for a display. Aborigines and dingoes are almost synonymous, but you see, the Aborigines supposed to be here for 65,000 years, and the dingoes, no way. They've been here for any more than 4,000 years, and both the Aborigines and the dingoes have DNA links back to India, and now further back to the Middle East. Oh, you're wondering what they are? No, that's not in Victoria. That's in North Queensland, not far from where Captain Cook landed after his ship ran into the Great Barrier Reef. There's a set of bats hanging upside down on a cave wall. Why am I showing you this? To remind you that these Aboriginal people who had never seen a European in their recent history that they knew of, and Captain Cook, who'd never actually seen one of these North Queensland Aborigines, actually got along reasonably well. And the Aborigines there had a story about they used to once, everybody that they knew of spoke the same language. Then they had a big party, and next morning they woke up and all of them spoke different languages. You realize when you go around the planet, every race we've dealt with many times has a traditional account of creation. The Aborigines talk about Bunjil, the creator, who created everything, dogs included. They have a story of a big flood. So did Captain Cook, was found in Genesis chapters 7 through to 11. But did you know that even the Aborigines have a story that's just like Babel? The first man in all traditions is always the same color, and none of these things can be explained by evolution. But I'll throw in something extra about about Captain Cook. When he was in Hawaii, he was actually fed dog. Now, to an Englishman, eating dogs is sort of an anathema. Now, think of the number of Chinese shops that have been fined because they would go and catch all the dogs and cats and serve them up as food. Not a done thing in England, but it's done in many cultures. And in Hawaii, one interesting thing emerges out of Captain Cook's diary himself. Do you know what they fed their dogs in Hawaii? The ones they would eat, they fed on vegetables. Don't be surprised. All the creatures in the beginning fed on vegetables. None of this, all of this sort of stuff can be explained by evolution at all. So let's get to domestic dogs and then check our time again. There's one of my friends, and there's her mutant friend. Now, we've had a photographer in creation research for many years who's done some brilliant stuff on dogs, domestic dogs. Oh, he went to a big dog show to photograph for us. Now, do you notice we put a little epithet after the Canis lupus? Canis is Latin for dog. Lupus is Latin for the origin of the dog. It's associated with its color, really. And familiaris, this is the wild dog that lives with us. It's no longer very wild. To show you how well they get along, here's my wife, and there's one of our Canis lupus familiaris. In fact, my dogs are well known for loving people. We train them as much as we can to love the cats, to love the dogs. We have a little bit of trouble when the kangaroos get her on the outside of the fence and they want to tear the fence down and chase the kangaroos. And they never seem to catch them, by the way. There's my dog, Canis lupus, very familiaris, a beautiful dog, but from a breed that was bred originally for hunting. Yes, that dog could hunt. That dog could track it down, but that dog was a beautiful dog with a wonderful characteristic which we encouraged. Do you realize that dogs themselves, when you look at their behavior, they reflect their owners? Now, if you're wondering why dogs become nasty, look at their owners. Remember the dog breeder I had standing outside my door here when someone came up to the gate and the dog growled and the hair on its back hackled? Well, he voted with the dog, I voted with the dog, and the guy at the gate, you wouldn't have wanted to know he was a regular con guy. Well, there's where Glenn started reading before. God commanded the earth to bring forth the plants, each after its own kind, and the plants were good. And it repeats this about the birds. It repeats it about the fishes. It repeats it about it repeats it so often that even Richard Dawkins, who knows his Bible very well, knows he has to destroy this concept if he wants to get his atheistic, immoral, amoral view of evolution across. If David Attenborough wants to keep pretending that as an atheist he's not going to stand before God on Judgment Day, which he will, then he has to destroy the Bible's teaching that 10 times God created things each after their own kind. Hebrew min, Latin and Greek genus. Okay, so the whole classification system has a biblical creation basis. That's why it works, both on living creatures and on fossils. That's why dogs produce their own kind. They do it no matter what extremes you want to try and breed. And of course, you'll finally get to the situation where you can trace the history of dogs. The grey wolf, Canis lupus. That's what those two Latin words mean. Canis dog, lupus as in grey, and you'll see the extremes, the black ones and the white ones. And in fact, that's what you get back in 2004, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, 6 wolves at least were the ancestor of all modern dogs, claimed Dr. Deborah Lynch. Now, I think she's right, and I think when she picked that number, she mightn't have known it, but when you look at the Bible, the animals, the clean animals, yes, by this time, God had to tell Noah there would clean animals come on board in 7s, the unclean in 2s. Now, around the world at the moment, if you go by the traditional definition of clean, animals that eat dead things, animals that will attack others and kill things, then you will find that the ratio of clean animals to unclean is still roughly 3 to 1, 3 pairs to 1 pair. 7 clean animals got on, but one of them was sacrificed. You realize that that number there has a biblical association because in the beginning, the dogs were clean. All the animals that Captain Cook ate, all the dogs were raised on vegetables. So when you look at Great Danes versus Chihuahua, that may be the extreme limits of the size we can get for those breeds of dogs, whether they be tiny or whether they be large. But when you look at Irish wolfhounds, now don't forget, Craig, Ireland is not part of England. You'll get yourself in real trouble. And make sure you're putting the Australian flag up there if you're ever driving around there and say, I believe in Irish wolfhounds.
I know that.
We actually, sadly, and I'm really glad the RSPCA and all the other dog groups have voted to actually oppose breeding of extreme mutations. It's certainly the ugliest dog in the world, but it's not an example of evolution, even though it's an example of change. It's an example of devolution, and that's the only sort of change you really see in the planet, even when we use our brains to try and put things back together again. we are struggling to reverse the good to bad to worse rule that happens in the real world. So as Dr. Glenn was saying, many species, one kind, no evolution at all. Many species, one min, that's the biblical word, the Hebrew word, one genus. Well, in some cases, we know there are only one creature to a genus, one creature to the biblical phylum, one creature to the family. In other cases, there are so many, we don't know where to draw the limits. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not. But it's true of people as well. There's Dr. Diane Eager's borrowed picture. Look at the variation in human beings. And you could artificially breed those colors. In fact, the colors of the different races are largely due to adult preference. I don't want my daughter marrying one of those white ones, or I don't want my son marrying one of those black ones. Societal pressure has maintained those different color variations, even though they are all variations along a linear group. Okay, let's sort of, before we move on to the second section here, give you a reminder. Your Bible is right. You can read it and you can trust it. Now, I'd encourage you, those of you who live in Southeast Queensland, to remember next Saturday from 1 o'clock onwards, and next Sunday morning, the next weekend right from now, John Mackay and Steve Cardno will be in Margate Baptist Church, and will be running a repeat history of the Australian Aborigines. You want to see where the Aborigines came from? No, they haven't been here 65,000 years. They got off Noah's Ark because the Bible is right. The evidence backs up the Bible being right. The evidence shows you they all spoke one language. The stories in North Queensland back up the Bible story about Babel. The dogs eating vegetables backs up what Genesis says in chapter 1. All right, you're going to have an opportunity to ask some questions shortly, but let's remind you of the real history of dog diet. Sharp teeth, a design killer? Well, that's what I was trained to believe. When you dig up a fossil, sharp teeth, a design killer. Now, these are all dogs I've had experience with. This is my daughter's dog. Look at this crazy little thing. Stealing peas to enjoy and eating them straight out of the garden. In fact, when you look at my dog, look at that nasty, vicious dog. In fact, he loved mangoes, would pick them and eat the fruit off them. No, he didn't eat the fruit at all. He actually removed the fruit so he could get at the hard seed. And then he would use his sharp teeth to actually rip that leathery seed apart and get the really nutritious kernel. You see, I'm mentioning that because there are other reasons for sharp teeth apart from killing animals. Ripping tough vegetables apart is one of them. Look at this, a well-designed carrot killer. No, these are not all set up. I found him out the backyard eating a carrot. And this is one of my latest dogs. Isn't he cute? A couple of years old now. There's my lovely wife. Isn't she cute? Oh, kiss, kiss. In fact, he started to steal into the office bringing smelly bones. Now, that's the part you don't like. But in reality, as he grew up, like Glenn said, he would find my corn crop and he would raid the corn and he would sit on his own and defy you to actually get it off him. He loved to sit the corn and enjoy it. He stole my strawberries. He digs up my potato crop and eats them raw. And the beans and peas, yes, no matter how big he is, he loves to eat the vegetables. Don't be surprised. That's how they were bred in the beginning by God. Now, I don't know about your dogs. Grapes are supposed to be bad for dogs, but the foxes of the field, and the foxes are a type of dog, they raid the grapes, and my dogs raid the grapes too. Doesn't seem to have any bad effect on them. I've never noticed it anyway, and they certainly don't show it. Oh, what's he eating? Well, this is a leftover tomato. Yes, he was enjoying his bit of tomato fruit, and we showed you this once before. So let's see if I can turn this on, because we discovered that he enjoyed the chicken food. So he was a lovely candidate for Captain Cook's meals. in Hawaii. Well, we're not going to eat him, by the way. So when you have a look at, whoops, let's get on here. Why won't we move on there? See this creature here? A good place to finish before we have a short time of questions and then a really important biblical point. What do I eat? Well, this turns out to be a vegetarian Chinese water deer. And the point is very simple, and you need to see through Attenborough, the BBC, the textbook, the actual false information you're given, and start with God's word at the start. Don't forget, if you're in Queensland, come and see us next Saturday and Sunday at Margate Baptist Church on the origin of the Aborigines and even what they eat. So question, do sharp teeth tell you what an animal eats? The answer is no. The shape of an animal's teeth don't tell you what it eats, only how it eats, what it chooses to eat. Yes, you can feed my dog meat. The dog will eat it if it's hungry, but my dog will actually go hunting for vegetables. My dog will actually pick the beans and the peas. My dog will actually gnaw on the watermelon and all those sort of things. The shape of an animal's teeth don't tell you what it eats, only how it eats, what it chooses to eat. Okay, can I encourage you? Thanks to those who are making donations to our program this morning. Yes, we need all that we can get. So I'd encourage you, increase that support, increase donations. And Sam, let's go back to the team and have a few minutes of questions before I finish off with a really important point.
Great stuff. All right. So let's do one or two questions before we finish off. This one comes in from Douglas Boffey. Do you have the same opinion as Ken Ham vis-a-vis the poodle?
Repeat the question.
Do you have the same opinion as Ken Ham vis-a-vis the poodle?
Anybody got a comment?
Don't know what Ken Ham's opinion is.
I think his general comment is that poodles are mutants, basically. So, in a sense, we would have a similar opinion to that.
Except I'll add one thing. Having been all through Europe, I can tell you what poodles used to be like, and the French used to breed them for chasing lions. When they ran out of lions in France, they didn't bother with the big ones anymore, and just the tiny little ones you can put in your briefcase were fine. So the original French poodle is a big dog, and it loved jumping in poodles to fetch ducks and things like that. So, yeah, modified Ken Ham, I guess you can say, because I spent many years listening to Ken Ham give lectures as he traveled with me around Australia.
Yes, on a hunting trip, a friend of mine called his buddy who had a show dog, a poodle, big poodle, and the dog was for tracking animals. That's what they used it for. So they were able to find the deer that his daughter had shot by this big poodle.
Interesting. Never heard of a poodle being a hunting dog before, but there you go. You learn something new every day. This is a question I think we could probably include pets in general with this, but the question is, do all dogs go to heaven?
Dogs, but not cats.
Low blow.
You haven't read the dog Bible here. Okay, can I just throw in something here? Billy Graham is online. Is on record, and also many older, wiser Christians who usually got this question from young people because the puppy dog is so wonderful. The puppy dog has just died. The little kid is sad, and the death of any creature is a sad thing. So never laugh at their question. But the best wisdom I've come across is for them to actually share, well, God knows you loved your puppy dog, and if you need a puppy dog in heaven to make you happy, God will make sure it's there. Now, you didn't answer the question, but in reality, you need to realize that we don't spend eternity stuck in heaven on cloud nine. There's a new heavens and a new earth, and all the animals that you need will be there, and they'll all be new creations. You may not recognize your own puppy or whatever. Whether we'll have dogs again or Garfield cats, the Bible is not too specific on that. But in reality,
not Chinese crested dogs.
Yeah, that's right. Certainly not Chinese crested dogs. But the interesting point is when you look at us, and Diane, you might want to add on to this, when you think about the difference between man and the beast and the plants, no one asked me, do my carrots go to heaven when they die? You never ever think, if you're a vegetarian, munch, oh, I've killed my carrot. You don't think of that because it is so innate in you that carrots don't have a spiritual or eternity capacity. And yet when you look at your dog, the dog has a personality, and you can joke with it. It can joke with you. It can play tricks on you and vice versa. It has an intellect that is way beyond that of a cabbage or a cauliflower. And yet Dawkins and Co. would insist there's a continuum. No, there's not. They were created separately. They were created to be under our dominion. So we have a natural affinity to them, but yet the carrot, it has only physical structure. It has form. It has no spiritual being. And yet when you get to the dog, it is very evident the dog has a personality. And you and I, we struggle. There's one scripture which comes to mind, and that is the word of God is sharper than a two-edged sword, and it divides the soul from the spirit. Now, psychologists need to use the Bible because they try to separate soul and spirit, but they fail miserably using their Dawkins-Attenborough evolutionary Darwinist nonsense to analyze man. And yet man has body, soul, and spirit. Animals have body and soul, and carrots only have body. That's why God never forbade you to eat them at all. And yes, Captain Cook got away with eating dogs, and the dogs had no eternal consequences because Cook ate them. But we are forbidden from eating people and shedding their blood like that. So, Diane, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, there is a verse I think it's in the book of Job, that refers to or asks the question, what happens to the soul of the beast? So it does say that the beasts, which includes dogs, have a soul, so they have a mind and a personality. But they're never referred to as having a spirit. So, but plants, animals, and people are all physically biological. We all have DNA. Plants seem to just be that sort of physical biological machines that are made for food and for habitat. Animals have an extra feature that they do have what we could call a soul. They have personality and a mind, and can make relationships with one another. It's more than just communication, because plants can communicate by chemical signals and things like that. So there's something more about animal communication than just that sort of communication of chemical and physical signals that you get, including in plants. But as for it doesn't say anywhere that animals have an eternal spirit, and I think that's where the difference is. Human beings have an eternal spirit. We are designed to live forever, and one day we will. And that new heavens and new earth will be just as real and just as physically real as the earth that we live on now, except that there'll be no curse. So there won't be any of those dogs with really ugly, damaging personalities.
Yes, and Isaiah talks about the animals in the new heaven, new earth, and how we're going to be living at peace with them. So, yes, I think there'll be dogs of some canine form, but we may prefer, I want personally, a dinosaur for a pet. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay,
there's
Sam,
no reason
could
why God can't remake those. He made them in the first place.
That's right.
I can just see Glenn starting a side hustle in heaven of raptor races or something like that.
Well, raptors were like a chicken. I'd like to get something a little bigger.
Well, Utahraptor was quite big.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, the other raptors.
Yeah. Do you want to do one more?
do one more, then I'll finish off, Sam.
All right, then. This one is an interesting one. This comes in from Tokenomics. I like the name. Since dogs have high phenotypic variance and allegedly low genotypic variance, can we extrapolate this logic to claim that phenotypic diversity observed in fossils cannot prove mutation evolution?
Okay, having experienced both, I'll take the first step. One of the problems with fossils. Now, you might struggle with this for the moment until you actually have to go and do it for yourself. When you have animals, you can actually run experiments. If it's fruit flies, and I spent 3 years ripping salivary glands out of Drosophila melanogaster, matching the chromosomal bands and trying to figure out why some had red eyes, why some had 2 pairs of wings or whatever. You can actually run experiments on living creatures because they're there, and you can check what results when you cross this with that and whether you can put them in the same category. So when you go up and down the coast of California and you find 4 different variations of fruit flies and they won't interbreed, all of a sudden you discover that your interbreeding rule is not necessarily the definition of species. They can't interbreed even though they've got exactly the same genetics. The bits and pieces have changed position on the chromosome, right? So there's many ways to produce species, even though they can be phenotypically very similar. They're fruit flies. But when you come to dig up fossil, no, I've never found a fossil fruit fly, even though I've got lots of fossil flies. The biggest problem, and Diane can confirm this, is we cannot run breeding experiments.
Mm-hmm.
And at the moment, all of our classification depends on you finding some way to breed these creatures and see what actually happens. Diane?
Yes, that's right. So you've got to remember that fossils are dead things, and dead things do not breed. We can, one of the questions we had sent into the Ask site actually was about breeding between coyotes and wolves to produce a creature called a coy wolf. And this has been suggested to be a new species, and therefore it's evidence for evolution. But all it is really is confirmation that canines are one kind. It's just like the dingoes breeding with the farm dogs, and the coyotes breeding with the domestic dogs. So you can get tremendous variation within the same kind, so that they are right. Phenotypical diversity just means different body structure, but you can produce that with very small changes in the genetics. And it's those growth factors, the one that we mentioned about the mutated dogs with the short legs, it's those growth factors. Now you only need a very small change in the genetics, and the growth factors, which are the sort of stop-go signals to say, all right, grow here, don't grow there. Very small change can produce quite a big change in the actual body structure. So yes, variation within kind. Dogs, classic example.
All right, Sam, how about I take the last section for the moment? All right. Now, for this, I went through, and my secretary and I, we got some Bible verses out on the history of dogs, on what the Bible says about dogs. So you might find this quite intriguing and quite challenging. In fact, there are 40 references in the Bibles to dogs which are in the negative. You gain the impression, particularly as reading Jewish history outside the Bible, that dogs were not all that popular. Even though, here's some of the things you find mentioned in the Bible. In the book of Job, chapter 30, they that are younger than I have me in derision, whose fathers I wouldn't have even put with the dogs of my flock. Now, do you realize that Job had some people who'd become his enemies, and they were so distasteful, he said, I wouldn't have even let them look after the dogs of my flock or camp with the dogs of my flock. So by Job's day, and in the history of the Bible, Job's one of the oldest books, they were using dogs to work with their sheep. So the shepherds, if you disdain dogs, you disdain shepherds. They were smelly. They lived out in the fields, and that attitude still continues in many countries today. But what's interesting, if you pick up that book of Job, you find in the surrounding chapter, it talks about people, young people who abandon their society and go out and they live in caves. silly people. This is cavemen arising out of cities that were even existing, civilization that existed in the days of Job. And we go on to read the one book Bible verse that identifies a specific dog in Proverbs chapter 30, verse 29 to 31. It mentions about the lion. Well, that's not a dog. It mentions quite a few creatures, horses, but it talks about greyhounds, being able to outrun them. So this is in the book of Proverbs. So Proverbs, you're around about King David, King Solomon. So we know they were keeping dogs for hunting. So, greyhounds really fast. We use them today for racing. And I still remember the controversy. They would train the dogs by putting a cotton bunny up and training the dog to chase it. That's regarded as socially unacceptable anymore. So they have to find some way to get the dog to get its hormones going for its original training, and that was to chase animals. Okay, then in Genesis, you'll find again what Glenn said, God created them after their own kind. But by the time you get to Genesis chapter 7, Noah is told to take every clean beast, and he's given a certain number, and then there'd be 2 of each unclean. So between creation and Noah's flood, have the dogs gone downhill to the point of killing? Well, we're not sure, but afterwards you find that God tells Noah he is free to eat any creature that moves. Now, this was an important rule because God told Noah he would, take all the animals, 7 of each clean kind. 1 of them would be sacrificed. He would take 2 of each unclean kind. But after the flood, he changes the rules about what he can eat. He no longer has to eat the carrots. Animals that move, carrots don't move. You never have to catch a carrot, right? The dogs do. Now, it's interesting. Not one animal, pigs included, was excluded from Noah's diet. So even if the animals such as dogs had become classified as unclean by then, and it seems to be unlikely, given everything we know about the history of wolves and the origin of wolves with the rest of the dogs, that the wolves and the dogs were still regarded as clean. By the time you get to Genesis chapter 9, God puts a sign in the sky, the rainbow, and he tells Noah, this is a sign to all the creatures. Now, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I'm pretty sure that the reason I hear the birds chirping when they see a rainbow after the storm is not just that the storm is finished, but somehow they know this is a promise from God. Yes, it's a promise that God will never judge the world again with water, and it's just as big a promise to those who leave one color out and pretend that homosexuality is okay, that there is another judgment coming, but this time by fire. But the animals understand that in some way, shape, or form. So it's interesting as you follow through the history of animals, because by the time we get to Matthew chapter 15, Jesus is talking to a Canaanite lady, and she's actually saying, you could heal me if you wanted to. And Jesus actually quizzes her and her attitude. Let me read you what he replied, or what she replied to him. And she said, true, Lord, what you said, yet even the dogs, you regard me as dogs. I'm one of these people. I'm not a real Jew. I live up in the mountains there. Even the dogs eat the crumbs which fall from their master's table. So in her society, the dogs were not just chasing animals. They were not just rounding up cattle. They were not just sheepdog anymore. They'd moved into the house. Now, there's quite a few cultures that still won't let the dogs in the house. I'm glad Glenn's American culture, my English culture, Scottish culture has dogs that enjoy being in the house. Oh, yes, you certainly have to be careful about where they poop. Oh, and by the way, those people who want to know, do dogs go to heaven? Perhaps you should ponder, since fleas love dogs, would the dogs take their fleas to heaven? I never get asked that question. By the time you get to one statement we read in Proverbs, it reminds you of your responsibility. Not only did God give us authority over the animals, it says a righteous man regards the life of his beasts. So you want dogs, you want seahorses, then you are responsible to God for their care. I say that seriously because what happens at Christmas time? The pet shelves, etc., get raided for animals. They're given as Christmas presents 3 months later, the people, the parents and the kids decide, I can't bother cleaning up. I don't want to have to feed this. This guy wheezes everywhere. No, sorry. A righteous person in God's sight is not just one who's saved, is someone who cares for the animals that are under his control. Now, perhaps we should finish off with just this verse. It's out of Philippians. It says here, when Paul writes to the church at Philippi, which he seriously loved, right? This is the one church that never gets chastised. He says, beware of dogs, beware of evil workers, beware of the concision. Now, the issue in the early church, of course, one of the issues was a lot of the Jews had become Christians. They come from a background of very legalistic, under the law. They're now redeemed by grace through faith, and that not of themselves. And yet there are workers coming in saying, oh, listen, the word says you need to be circumcised. And Paul says, don't fall for it, guys. You were not saved by circumcision, even under the law. You got into Israel, but you never got into heaven by being circumcised. You need a circumcision of your hearts. You are saved by grace. But notice the insult. Notice the term, beware of dogs. Now, I heard one pastor get up and say, that means homosexuals. Well, I've got no doubt about that. There are some cultures where that is how it would be read. That does mean homosexuals. I mean, sniffing around the backsides of other men, that's how they would view it. But in this context, it refers to anybody who disobeys God. Anybody, whether it's Jewish, whether it's legalistic, whether it's a Christian who wants you to not do pin bowling or whatever because it's happening in a hotel. No, sorry, that's got nothing to do with the game itself. What you're looking at is people who want to have more laws than God does, at the same time as you're looking at people who want to have less laws than God does. Can I encourage you as we finish our study today, remember God gave us his word. It starts in Genesis, it finishes in Revelation, and you are saved by grace through his faith that he gives to you. It's a gift. So if you don't have it, ask. He freely gives to those who will ask. You can't be saved by what you do, even to your pets, but you can only be saved by Jesus Christ, who was crucified on a cross, whose blood was shed for you. Now, that may not be your way to be saved, but in reality, it's the only way you can be saved in God's eyes. Oh, and then, by the way, make sure you listen to what he says about your animals and caring for them on this planet, because you will be held accountable for what you do to his property. The dogs are not your property. The seahorses are not your property. They belong to him, and he will hold you accountable for how you care for them and treat for them. Hope you've been blessed by the day. Keep praying for Joe and those of you in Southeast Queensland. We'll see you next Saturday afternoon and Sunday morning at Margate Baptist for our next version of Aboriginal history in Australia. Great program. Sam, back to you to close.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in this week. Been a very fur-filled episode, if I do say so myself. We've had cats and dogs, both spoken about and live in person. So if you missed that, you're going to want to have to check out the replay of that one. But please do, if you're interested, please do check out our newsletters. If you go to linkedin.bio/creation research, or if you've got a smartphone, you can get up your fancy camera on your smartphone and scan that fancy QR code, and you can get access to all of our links on there, and you can find where to donate, where to get information on all our museums and things like that. Also, as well, just a reminder, Creation Research Live has launched. It is now live. Please do go over, if you haven't already, immediately run after this live stream is over to www.creationresearch.live. Sign up for a free account. And you can watch one or two little bits and pieces, give you a little bit of a taste. And if you like the content, please do consider signing up to our premium to get access to all of our premium content. The monthly subscription starts at $9.99 US buckaroos, and a yearly subscription is at 90 US buckaroos. Obviously, these prices will change depending on where you are around the world. We've got lots of great content on there, and we've got some big plans for it. And also, as well, just another reminder, if you do want to take us out on the go, We are available in your pocket. You can check us out on your favorite podcast streaming service. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and many more. So please do consider following us on there so you can catch up on all of our previous episodes on the go. But that's it from us. Next week, we are dealing with After Noah's Flood. So that will be an interesting episode for sure. But any final words, anyone?
Love your dogs, but love the Lord with all your heart, mind, and soul.
Amen.
Yes, exactly. I think we can learn a lot about loving God from the way dogs love us.
Look at that. You've got to go to heaven.
Yeah.
Got to go to heaven.
Anyway. All right, then. God bless everyone, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.